Happy Hump Day to everybody. Thanks for clicking on to the Wednesday edition of Vogan's European Outlook. Hope everybody is safe and well wherever you are. We still are watching the weather evolve. Interesting times coming up, and certainly things are playing out pretty much as I expected. We do have a very, very interesting video that was released by the Met Office yesterday. The Met Office Deep Dive, released every Tuesday, and our very good friend Aidan McGivern provides an excellent explainer in terms of how the pattern over the Central Pacific then started to kind of create a ripple effect across the Northern Hemisphere and change in the overall sequence of events. But I do encourage you to check out Aidan's in-depth explanation of the upward motion versus the sinking within the atmosphere and how it all works in yesterday's deep dive. I will leave a link in the description below, but certainly a fantastic explanation, as I've already said, by Aidan, and explaining how a system that was unusually deep near the Hawaiian Islands provided flash flooding. We had 120-mile-per-hour winds over the mountains of the Big Island. We also had the blizzard conditions over the tops. We had the flash flooding, etc. We had the whole potpourri of weather across the Pacific, but it's the forcing of air from that feature up into the atmosphere, hitting the troposphere, getting forced to, the air was forced to span out, divide as it reached the troposphere, and obviously that air has to come down somewhere, and it is in the form of high pressure. And essentially, what we've got is the same situation now developing over, or has already developed, should I say, over the Atlantic. So across the other side of North America, we've seen a very similar pattern develop. We're in a phase 4 or 5 of the MJO. That tends to tighten up the jet stream across Pacific and the Atlantic. But what is happening is these deep areas of low pressure that is moving northwards, transferring a lot of warmth out of the subtropics towards the Arctic region. But in turn also, we're seeing with very strong areas of low pressure, one over the Pacific. We've seen one just north of Iceland. That is driving a tremendous amount of warm energy up into the Arctic atmosphere. But as that upward motion then hits the troposphere, it is forced then to descend in the form of sinking air, and that is what creates the high pressure. And the stronger the upward motion, the consequential stronger the sinking motion is downstream, and we're seeing that taking place. We're seeing it in the Pacific, we're seeing it in the Atlantic, and as Ian explained, it's a question of the creation of that sequence of events in the first place. Does that then repeat itself? And it looks as if we're seeing a somewhat of a repeat of the high pressure building. So what we've got is, this is the upper level pattern here over the northern hemisphere. So just to kind of for you to be able to kind of understand where we are talking about here. This is North America right here. This is Greenland, Iceland, UK, Europe. And what is happening is we're seeing, as the strong upward motion is taking place to the northeast of the Hawaiian Islands, we're forcing a large-scale subsidence over the North Pacific, the Aleutians, into the Pacific Ocean. And what that's doing is that is then leading to a downstream repeat over the Atlantic. We're seeing areas of low pressure, deep trough, exit North America. And what that's doing is, if we go back a couple of frames here, there's that deep trough. So this is back to Sunday at the weekend. You can see this deep trough area of low pressure then deepens between the ridge over the Azores and the trough over the North Atlantic into Greenland. As the system then runs that boundary here between very strong upward motion versus sinking motion, it's essentially the two are feeding off one another and creating, as this warmth gets lifted north, it's creating this anomalous high pressure cell between Scandinavia and Svalbard. We're also seeing the same thing taking place over Alaska. Now, as we play through, we've got that area of high pressure that is essentially building over the top of the UK at the moment. We're going to see settled conditions, clear skies, light winds, cold by night, cold by day. And what is happening is these areas of low pressure continue to drive that area of high pressure. We've got this deep area of low pressure. This was back on Monday, 935 millibars versus a 1030 plus millibar high over Europe. But it's as that low then gets lifted further north, continuing to transport that warmth out of the subtropics into the Arctic region, you start to see the high then getting lifted up into Scandinavia. But what happens is, if you notice here, this is Wednesday this morning, 6Z. We've got another area of low pressure, deep low, running the boundary between the trough and the ridge. That is going to then refire an even stronger ridge. We're seeing this ridge now starting to come over the top of the UK as of the overnight period tonight. So as that deep area of low pressure runs between Iceland and Greenland here, we're seeing the pressures build as that all that rushed air moving up through the atmosphere hits the troposphere. It creates a divergence and then sinking, and that sinking is present over the UK as a consequence. Aidan explains this in a much better way than I'm doing. But look at how the pressure really builds across into Scandinavia. And what that's doing is, we obviously don't have a tremendous amount of cold at the moment, but I think what's needing to be looked at here in a bit more detail is the fact that what the pattern is doing and how this is possibly seeding something later down the road, because you're asking the question. We've had a very strong polar vortex, both temperature, we're been close to minus 90 for some time at 10 millibars, down to 30 millibars in particular. Then we've got this very vertically stacked polar vortex structure, so both within the troposphere as well as the stratosphere. But what this is doing is, it's creating a disturbance of that vortex over the Arctic region. And what essentially needs to be looked at here is that the modeling is struggling to understand how to distribute and redistribute this cold pool as it starts to get broken apart here. Yes, we might not necessarily be seeing a full-fledged displacement split or whatever, but this strong high is going to then start to draw some of this Arctic air around the base of the high, underneath, across Europe, and eventually towards the UK, depending on how much fetch we can get off that easterly flow on the southern flank. So these are all questions that need to be asked, but look at this here, how this high then positions itself, its orientation. But watch what happens, by the way, as we start to see another trough move eastwards off Newfoundland. We're then starting to see the heights as we redistribute that upward versus sinking motion within the atmosphere. You're starting to see a change taking place. High pressure then builds to the north of the UK. We've got lower heights down towards Biscay, Iberia, even towards the southern half of the British Isles here. But then what happens is, we see these features running off the eastern side of Canada and then start to move eastwards more into the North Atlantic. By doing so, it's actually going to then start to pull this Scandinavian high westwards towards Greenland. And eventually what happens is, we start to build pressure up into the Arctic region, forcing more of an Atlantic influence out into the Atlantic. But remember, it's much further displaced. So while you may say to yourself the Atlantic's just going to all of a sudden take over, with the pressure building to the north, acts like a dam. It creates a boulder in the atmosphere, forces the storm track that re-establishes itself, by the way, over the North Atlantic, but then starts to spread eastwards, but down further south than you would typically see due to the block over the top. Looking at the CFSV2 weeklies, this is the upcoming 7 days. Tremendous amount of blocking as we see these deep features and large scale sinking over Canada, over the North Atlantic. Got deep areas of low pressure transporting that warmth, building the pressure over and to the east. You can see here, look at the difference between week 1 and week 2 as we go. Remember, this is the CFSV2 here, and it's starting to go to the other models. This is the difference between week 1 and week 2. So go back to week 1, and you can see the difference here in terms of the position of the trough. It's further east, and therefore the ridge further north is further west as a consequence, and it kind of undercuts here, so to speak. But this is a very interesting evolution of the pattern. Let's have a look and see what the CFSV2 weeklies temperature wise are showing, and then we'll look at the individual models. So let's go to the European view here. Back to week 1. Now the models does eventually show that the Atlantic returns once again. We get areas of low pressure coming in and something less cold. But this is week 1. And you can see here that we've got the below average temperatures across the UK, Ireland, near continent. Into week 2 here, we're still below average. Then in the week 3, it looks as if it's starting to ease off in terms of temperature anomaly. Let's have a look and see what the GFS ensemble is indicating here. And again, remember what I've said already. This is a gradual process into something colder. I've not said that it is all of a sudden going to be a beast from the east next week. I did make mention several days ago, dare I say, some of the models were indicating that kind of scenario, but that was an extreme case, and often the models do kind of back off that idea. But it's going to be interesting to see how much this pattern can establish itself and anchor, and then do we start to see the results of that. Remember, what's going on up above affects what goes on underneath, even though it's what's going on underneath at the moment that's affecting what's going on up above, if you catch my drift. So let's have a look at the European view in terms of the GFS ensemble. We'll look at the temperature anomalies here, and then we'll look at the other aspects. So this is the upcoming 5 days below average. It only takes us out to 8 days, but you can see here the GFS indicating below average out to the 13th. Let's have a look and see what the 6Z run showed off the model here and play through. And again, the potential is there for something colder, but there is absolutely no guarantees. Now, the GFS is washing out the cold between the 16th and the 21st of February, interestingly. This is the ECMWF, first of all. Let's go back to the here and now, play through the loop. We've got this cold flow around the top of the high at the moment, which is still positioned to the south. We've seen rain, sleet, and snow. We've had an ice risk, even to sea level this morning across the north. Rather chilly air actually embedded within that westerly flow, by the way, across the top. There's the high building in, and then it very quickly scoots off to the east, thanks to this deep trough over the Atlantic. The areas of low pressure deepening as they left north, and obviously the pressure difference here indicates that we've got some fairly strong winds in the channel here between UK and Iceland here. Continue to play through. There's the high then linking up between Western Russia and Southern Scandinavia. We do have somewhat of a broken easterly flow, so we're not seeing that uniform, basically lines of equal pressure linking the UK with Siberia. That is not the case, but it's what may eventually come, may be something to pay attention to as we continue to play it through. You can see here there is a bit of a battle trying to take place between the easterly winds coming in underneath the high and the areas of low pressure that are going to try and come in from the west. But you notice the ECMWF sees this feature trying to move towards the southern UK, towards France. It's getting actually pulled back westwards, held at bay because of the easterly flow and the dominance of this high pressure. We've got two sails, one over Russia, one over southern portions of Norway, and we'll look at the 850s in just a second here. But you notice here that we're starting to hook things up slightly. If you follow the isobars here, we're connecting all the way to Western Russia, and you have to then think, are we starting to see the cold pool building as this area of high pressure remains more anchored in place for some time? Is it starting to draw some Arctic, even Siberian brand air into the pattern here, becoming entrained within the flow around this high? These are all things that need to be addressed here, but we can play through this loop all the way out to the middle portions of this month. We're holding back the Atlantic, and the more you hold back the Atlantic, the more opportunity there is for colder air to then start to get entrained within that flow underneath the high. So very fascinating times. Let's have a look at the 850s and see what it's indicating here. The near term is a modest brand of cold, nothing extreme, nothing Russian, nothing Siberian or anything like that. But this is where the ECMWF ends up, by the way. This is the latest run. So the modeling is going back and forth because it's struggling to redistribute the Arctic air. Once it gets out of the source region into the middle altitude pattern, models always have a difficult time. Number one, where does it want to put the cold air? Number two, how cold is the air as it then gets into the middle altitude pattern? Remember that the sun energy is slowly starting to get stronger at this time, but there you go, minus 20 Celsius at 850 over Portugal, not Portugal, wow, not Portugal at all, Poland, sorry, by the time we reach Thursday the 20th of February. So play through, we'll go back to the here now. You can see here the Atlantic brand cold air running around the top. Then we see something slightly less cold, but there's modest brand cold getting driven westwards underneath the high, as can be seen here. Then we kind of see these back and forth lobes of cold that are getting entrained underneath the high. Nothing significant, but under clear skies, light winds, and strong high pressure, it's going to stay relatively cold. It's not going to be necessarily extreme cold, but when you've got the right ingredients in place, even moderate brand cold can become trapped underneath high pressure, providing rather cold nights and also rather chilly days as well. That's the ECM. Let's look at the GFS, and then we'll kind of try and round up with that because I have to dash off to work. But let's have a look at the overview chart. Play it through back to the here and now. There's the high, then shifting up towards Scandinavia. We've got this easterly-ish, southeasterly flow. Area of low pressure, that's quite an interesting feature, by the way, spinning away on the southwestern flank of the high that may try and introduce some moisture into the moderate brand cold. So we need to watch this space. We'll have a look at the details of that in just a second. ECM is not really buying into that, I don't think. But continue to play through. You can see here that the high remains anchored in place, holding back the Atlantic, so to speak. Continue to play all the way through to the middle portions of next week. There's an approach, something moving in from the Atlantic, and it looks as if it may have some form of success in trying to penetrate that ridge of high pressure. So the GFS is now kind of leaning more towards an early warm up as opposed to the ECMWF, which is kind of flipped on its head compared to recent days. And then you notice here that there is a lot more influence of the Atlantic as we move towards the middle portions of this month. So it's all to play for here. A lot of complex things going on, a lot of fine details that can create a very, very different outcome in the 10 to 15 day period here. So fascinating times to come for sure. And if you're interested in understanding how this all works, I try my best to explain as best I can. So be sure to hit that subscribe button. It's absolutely free. 7 days a week content here on the channel. Let's round up by looking at the snow projections. Over the next day or two, we'll look at temperatures and see how cold we can expect. But like I say, it's a moderate brand of chill. Late this week, we maybe ease off slightly because we introduce more cloud and breeze. And with a non-extreme air mass coming in from the east, that cloud cover and breeze does allow the temperature to rise. It feels cold, but the actual air temperature isn't particularly cold. You have to, you know, try and read between the lines here a wee bit. Not, as soon as things like Scandi High, Easterlies are mentioned, people automatically, unfortunately, go to the extreme, which is 2018. We get easterly flows almost every winter, if not every second winter, and they come in so many different varieties. And what I've said already is the fact that it's what the overall evolution of the pattern, how much it becomes locked in, what's going on up above in the stratosphere and the connection with the troposphere, and how this may eventually evolve into something greater. I think that is something that has to be really taken into consideration, because I think there's some folks here that are perhaps hearing and seeing what they want. I think you have to try and remember context, perspective, and also kind of, without sounding patronizing or anything, pay attention to what is actually being said. Even the Met Office last night said the second option of two was a colder one, and there was still a lot of uncertainty with regards to the finer details going on over the Atlantic and over the Pacific. But they weren't writing off the potential of something colder next week, but they said that it was a second in line to a more a greater chance, if that makes sense here. So I think it's very important to pay attention to exactly what's being said, as opposed to just kind of filling in the gaps and kind of hearing and seeing what perhaps you want to see. There's people that have agendas of either cold or warm. I'm basically giving you the facts as to what I'm seeing here, giving you the possibilities. But let's have a look and see what the snow projections are of this model, and then we'll round up because time is really scooting on here. So let's have a look at the snow depth and see what the latest of the GFS is indicating here. So it's sniffing out some snow, so no real surprise there. It's the same as what it was back yesterday. A little bit of snow perhaps over parts of high ground Wales, for example, the southwest parts of the South Midlands, for example, but there isn't a great deal to play with here in this moderate brand of cold. Continue to play all the way out to the middle portions of the month. It's not really indicating much at all here. Looking at the CMWF here, real quick. Back to the here and now, play through the loop. You see that the snow, slight snow over parts of Wales and parts of England, even the south of England, especially over higher terrain. Then, as we continue to play towards the middle portions of the month, is it indicating anything of interest? Not really. So, not a particularly snowy prospect at the moment. But let's continue to watch these models as we go through the next few days. Interesting times, lots going on, and I'll keep you posted as much as I possibly can. Back again tomorrow with more. Like and subscribe. See you tomorrow.